If you stand in the juice aisle for even 30 seconds, the entire category tries to calm you down. Orchards on the label, sunlight in the background, words like pure, natural, real, immune support, pressed, harvest, family, orchard fresh. It is one of the most effective trust games in the grocery store, because juice does not present itself like candy or soda. It presents itself like the responsible choice, the better choice, the thing a parent buys with good intentions, or the thing an adult grabs when they want to feel like they are cleaning up their habits without giving up something sweet. That is exactly why this matters. This is not a panic video about one sip ruining your life, and it is not a claim that every bottle on this list is dangerous in some dramatic instant way. The real issue is something more ordinary and, for a lot of households, more important than shock. Some juice brands are simply not safe to trust at face value. Not safe to assume are wholesome just because the front label looks clean. Not safe to treat like everyday health products when the ingredient logic, sugar load, dilution, or branding tells a very different story the second you stop looking at the front and start reading the back. And that trust gap gets expensive fast. It affects what goes into lunchboxes, what ends up in the fridge door, what gets poured at breakfast, and what people keep buying for years because the label made one promise while the formulation delivered something else. So let's count down 10 juice brands that buyers should stop treating as automatically safe bets, and then we'll end with 4 that earn a lot more trust because they actually give you clearer information, cleaner trade-offs, and fewer surprises. Number 10 is Capri Sun. Capri Sun survives on one of the most powerful shopping shortcuts in America. If it looks like it belongs in a kid's lunch, people assume somebody already did the filtering for them. The pouch is soft, playful, familiar, and almost engineered to bypass skepticism. It does not feel like a serious nutritional decision. It feels small. Harmless, convenient. That is the trick. A lot of juice purchasing mistakes begin when packaging makes a product feel too casual to audit. Now step back from the nostalgia and look at what Capri Sun often really is in practice. A sweet, flavored juice drink built for repeat consumption, not a meaningful fruit choice. Different varieties vary, but this is exactly the kind of brand where words like juice drink matter more than people think they do. That wording usually signals dilution, sweetener dependence, or a product design built around taste and shelf appeal first, fruit integrity second. And because the pouch is small, people mentally discount the sugar conversation. They do not think of it as a bottle of anything. They think of it as a pouch, a little pouch. That mental framing is doing a lot of work for the brand. The bigger problem is habit formation. Once a product earns kid-safe status in a household, it stops being examined. It becomes automatic. And automatic buying is where weak products hide best. Capri Sun is not number 10 because it is the worst thing in the aisle. It is number 10 because it teaches the exact wrong lesson at the start of the countdown, that cheerful packaging is somehow a substitute for strong label logic. It is not. Number 9 is V8 Splash. This one catches a different kind of buyer. Capri Sun sells convenience. V8 Splash sells justification. It borrows the credibility of vegetables and the V8 name, then meets the shopper with bright fruit flavors and a familiar health halo that feels more grounded than a standard juice box. For a lot of people, that alone lowers their guard. If it comes from the V8 family, they think, it must be at least somewhat disciplined. But this is where category confusion becomes a business model. A product can sit close enough to vegetables in the consumer imagination that people stop asking how much of that identity actually made it into the bottle. Once a drink leans heavily on fruit flavor, sweet taste, and a wellness-adjacent brand image, the real question is not whether the label can technically defend itself. The real question is what kind of product it is asking you to believe it is. And V8 Splash has long lived in that soft focus zone where people feel like they are making a better choice than they really are. Pause on that for a second, because this pattern repeats all over the aisle. When a brand borrows trust from one product line to sell a weaker one, the buyer is doing too much of the honesty work. You are filling in the integrity the label did not fully earn. That is why V8 Splash lands here. It is not just about what is in the bottle. It is about how effectively the branding gets people to stop asking whether this is really a vegetable-rooted choice or just a sweet drink wearing a more respectable jacket. Number 8 is Ocean Spray Cranberry Juice Cocktail. Cranberry has one of the cleanest health reputations in grocery culture. It sounds tart, sharp, almost medicinal in the old-fashioned sense. Not medicine, obviously, but serious, functional, purposeful. A fruit you buy for a reason, and Ocean Spray has spent years benefiting from that feeling. The problem is that many buyers hear cranberry and imagine a stern, unsweetened, almost disciplined drink, when the reality of a juice cocktail can be much softer, sweeter, and more processed than the mental picture suggests. This is one of the most important label literacy moments in the whole video. Cranberry on its own is extremely tart. That means when a mainstream shelf-stable cranberry product tastes easy, smooth, and broadly crowd-pleasing, something had to bridge that gap. That bridge can be dilution, sweetening, blending, or formulation choices that make the drink much less straightforward than the fruit story on the front implies. The issue is not that the company hid the category. The issue is that many shoppers do not treat cocktail as a serious warning word. They read it like decoration. It is not decoration. It is a formulation signal. And that matters because this is one of those products people buy while thinking they are being a little smarter than average. They are not buying a neon soda. They are buying cranberry. That identity makes people overlook how quickly an austere fruit can be transformed into something that behaves much more like a sweetened beverage with a healthy accent. When the front of the label sells clean tartness and the back reveals a much more comfortable drink, trust should drop accordingly. Number 7 is Minute Maid Fruit Punch. This is where the countdown stops pretending the category is confused and starts admitting that a lot of it is intentionally theatrical. Fruit Punch is one of the loudest examples of juice branding using fruit imagery to sell what is essentially a flavor experience. Bright red color, bold fruit collage, big taste promise. Everything about it says abundance. But abundance of what exactly? Not clarity, not simplicity. Usually not anything close to what a buyer would picture if they imagined actual fruit pressed and bottled with minimal interference. Minute Maid is powerful because it is familiar. It has household penetration. It feels like legacy. And legacy is one of the easiest ways to keep a product from being audited seriously. Families do not always reread brands they grew up with. They inherit them. They repurchase them on memory. That turns an old brand into a low-friction passenger in the cart, even when the product itself belongs in a very different mental category from the one consumers place it in. Here is the rule this brand teaches. Whenever the front label promises a whole bowl of fruit in liquid form, but the drink looks engineered first for sweetness, color, and broad appeal, you are not buying fruit logic. You are buying fruit theater. Minute Maid Fruit Punch is not just sugary or diluted in the abstract. It is a masterclass in how easily fruit language can be used to make a soft drink adjacent experience feel like it belongs under the health umbrella. It does not. Number 6 is Welch's Juice Cocktails. Welch's benefits from grapes the same way Ocean Spray benefits from cranberries. The fruit itself sounds serious. Grapes feel classic. Concord grapes feel even more rooted, even more real. Almost old world compared with the louder candy-style flavors around them. That seriousness creates automatic trust, especially with parents and older buyers who associate the brand with lunch tables, family kitchens, and something more respectable than standard sweet drinks. But cocktail is still cocktail, and this is where sentimentality becomes expensive. Buyers often remember the brand before they evaluate the bottle. They remember being handed it as kids. They remember it being around responsible adults. So the product arrives with preloaded moral credit. That is a dangerous advantage in any packaged food category, because once nostalgia steps in, scrutiny steps out. And Welch's is a perfect example of why a category can look safer than it is while still following the same soft logic underneath. Fruit identity up front, formulation compromises in the middle, sweetness doing far more of the heavy lifting than the orchard language suggests. A lot of people would never place a grape juice cocktail in the same mental bucket as a cheap sweet drink, but functionally, In daily habit terms, the gap can be a lot smaller than the label story makes it feel. That is what earns a spot on this list. Not the existence of grapes, the exploitation of what grapes symbolize to the buyer. We are halfway through, and by now the pattern should be obvious. The juice aisle does not just sell fruit, it sells permission. Permission to stop checking. Permission to assume that if the color comes from fruit and the branding sounds familiar, the product already passed some invisible honesty test. It did not. The most important shift you can make as a shopper is this: stop asking whether a drink sounds fruity, and start asking what exactly the bottle is asking you not to notice. Number 5 is Sunny D. Sunny D is almost too easy, and that is why it still matters. Most people know it is not pure orange juice. Most people know it is a highly engineered orange-adjacent drink. But familiarity can make obvious problems feel less important than they are. Sunny D has spent years sitting in that strange American space where everybody kind of knows what it is, yet it still enters fridges through the side door of convenience, nostalgia, and it's just for the kids. What makes Sunny D important in this countdown is not that it hides perfectly. It is that it proves how little the category sometimes needs to hide when the emotional story is strong enough. Bright citrus color, breakfast associations, orange-coated identity, a refrigerated presence that visually pushes it closer to juice than to soda in the consumer mind. All of that shapes perception before the label has even been read. And once again, the core problem is trust placement. If a product trades on the visual language of oranges, morning routines, and family use while delivering a far more manipulated, flavor-driven experience, it should not be granted the same credibility people give to actual juice. Sunny D is a reminder that juice adjacency is not juice integrity. Looking like breakfast is not the same as deserving breakfast-level trust. A product can feel normal for years and still belong on an avoid list if it repeatedly wins by lowering the shopper's critical attention. Number 4 is Simply Orange. Now the countdown gets more uncomfortable, because this is where we leave the obviously weak products and move into the brands many people genuinely believe are among the better choices in the store. Simply Orange looks like restraint. The bottle is clear. The branding feels clean. The name itself implies directness. No nonsense. Just orange juice. And that is precisely why it deserves a hard look. This is not about claiming the bottle contains some secret horror that the label does not disclose. It is about the massive confidence premium the brand earns from presentation. Simply Orange sells a feeling of nearness to the Grove. It looks less industrial than many competitors, less processed, less tampered with. But appearance is doing a lot of the persuasion. The shopper sees cloudy orange liquid, a simple bottle, calm branding, and starts projecting freshness far beyond what the buying context can necessarily support. Here is where consumer understanding has to mature. Even when a juice is 100% juice, that does not automatically mean it functions like a low-risk health buy in real life. It can still be a dense source of sugar. It can still remove the fiber and structure that slow down whole fruit eating. It can still be processed, stored, standardized, and presented in ways that feel more direct than they really are. Simply Orange is high on this list because it captures one of the biggest trust errors in the category, mistaking aesthetic simplicity for nutritional simplicity. The bottle looks honest enough that many people never interrogate how much confidence they are handing it. Number 3 is Tropicana. Tropicana has been in American refrigerators for so long that it almost feels like infrastructure. Not a product choice, but part of the architecture of breakfast. That kind of cultural placement is incredibly powerful. Once a brand becomes the default image of orange juice, most consumers stop comparing it to the actual standard it is supposed to represent. They compare everything else to it, and that is when a category leader becomes harder to question than it should be. Tropicana's strength is not just name recognition, it is institutional trust. It belongs to the old vocabulary of good enough to be normal. The carton or bottle says orange juice, the brand has history, and the purchase feels settled before the bottle ever gets opened. But if you are buying orange juice as a routine health habit, the questions that matter are not nostalgic ones. They are practical ones. How much of your confidence is based on fruit, and how much is based on decades of marketing familiarity? How much are you factoring in portion reality, sugar concentration, and the fact that liquid fruit can be consumed much faster than whole fruit without delivering the same experience of fullness or restraint? This is where the category stops making sense for a lot of people. They would never drink multiple oranges in a few minutes if they had to peel and chew each one. But in juice form, the volume feels light, the sweetness feels normal, and the habit becomes invisible. Tropicana is number 3, because it represents the comfortable mainstream version of the problem. A product that is not necessarily deceptive in some crude way, but is profoundly overtrusted, because the market taught people to confuse tradition with protection. Number 2 is Naked Juice. If the earlier brands won with nostalgia or family familiarity, Naked wins with aspiration. This is the bottle that tells buyers they are not just drinking juice, they are making a better decision, a cleaner decision, a more modern decision. The design language is smooth, elevated, almost wellness-coded, down to the posture it asks the buyer to adopt. You do not just toss Naked into the cart, you choose it as part of a self-image. And that is why it lands so high. Naked is one of the clearest examples of a health halo becoming more powerful than practical interpretation. When a bottle feels like wellness, many consumers stop evaluating it like a sweet beverage. They start evaluating it like a solution, something productive, something functional, something closer to a meal, or a smart upgrade, or a nutritional shortcut. But a blended fruit-forward drink can still carry a heavy sugar burden, still be easy to consume quickly, and still create a huge gap between the health identity on the shelf and the actual discipline it deserves in the diet. The visual texture helps the illusion. Thick, dense, colorful, it looks like nourishment you can see, and sometimes that visual richness becomes its own argument. People trust sediment, they trust opacity, they trust a bottle that looks substantial. But substance is not the same as balance, and premium design is not the same as permission. Naked ranks near the top because it turns a major consumer weakness into a lifestyle purchase. The desire to buy a story of health instead of doing the slower work of asking what, exactly, is making the drink feel so safe. And number 1 is Juicy Juice. This is the most revealing spot on the list because the issue is not just formulation, it is framing. Juicy Juice, especially in the minds of parents, has long benefited from a name that does half the persuasive work before the bottle is even lifted. The name sounds almost childlike in its honesty. Not complicated, not technical, just juice. Pure concept, simple language, easy trust. That is incredibly powerful when you are shopping fast, shopping tired, or shopping for children. But when a brand becomes shorthand for the obvious safe pick, that is exactly when it deserves the hardest scrutiny. Juice sold to families often gets a free pass because it is not positioned like candy. It is positioned like caregiving, a lunchbox pour, a breakfast pour, a thing bought with protective intent. And once a product occupies that emotional territory, people stop asking some very basic questions. Is this actually a product I want to normalize every day? Is the fruit story doing more work than the nutrition reality? Am I buying the image of parental responsibility, or am I buying something that truly earns that status? What makes Juicy Juice number 1 is not just the product category it lives in. It is the trust architecture around it, family branding, simple naming, long-standing familiarity, kid association, all of it combines to make scrutiny feel almost unnecessary. But this is exactly the kind of product where the bigger risk is routine. Not one bottle, not one sip, repetition, automatic use. Years of buying something because its entire identity was built to sound pre-cleared for children. When a brand's biggest advantage is that exhausted adults assume someone else already checked it carefully, that is not a small issue. That is the issue. Now, the aisle is not hopeless. There are brands that earn far more trust, not because they are magic, not because juice suddenly stops being juice, but because they usually make the trade-offs clearer, keep the ingredient story cleaner, and ask you to rely less on branding theater. If you are going to buy juice, these are 4 brands that tend to give a shopper a more honest starting point. Lakewood Organic is one of the strongest examples of what a more trustworthy juice brand looks like. The appeal here is not glamour, it is restraint. Many of its products lean into direct ingredient communication, glass packaging, and a less performative kind of premium feel. The juice often looks like it has not been cosmetically polished for maximum mass appeal, and that matters. Sediment, variation, stronger flavor edges, these are not flaws in this context. They are reminders that the product is not trying to feel easier than it is. You still need portion awareness. You still need common sense, but the brand earns trust because it usually asks for less blind faith and offers more clarity. R.W. Knudsen also tends to stand out for a similar reason. It often feels like a brand built for people who actually read labels, instead of just admiring them. The formulations are commonly more straightforward, the branding quieter, and the products less dependent on emotional overselling. That does not mean every bottle deserves equal praise or that every blend belongs in the same category as a single fruit juice. It means the brand more often invites an adult level of scrutiny and survives it. In this aisle, that is worth a lot. Santa Cruz Organic earns trust by doing something surprisingly rare in packaged beverages. It often looks like a company more interested in telling you what the product is than in flattering you for buying it. Organic labeling alone should never hypnotize anyone, but when it comes alongside simpler ingredient panels and a product identity that feels less inflated, it can be part of a more credible package. There is a difference between premium imagery and premium discipline. Santa Cruz Organic, at its best, leans more toward discipline. That is why buyers who want a cleaner baseline often end up respecting it. And then there is Uncle Matt's Organic, a brand that, in the better versions of this category, tends to benefit from a fresher, more perishable, less mass-smoothed identity. Again, this is not an ad, and it is not a claim that any juice should be treated like a limitless health drink. It is simply a recognition that some brands leave fewer trust gaps than others. When the product feels closer to actual juice logic and farther from beverage theater, that matters. When the label is cleaner and the promise is narrower, that matters. When the experience feels like a real food product rather than a marketing performance, that matters. So what is the actual buying rule here? It is simple, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Never let orchard imagery, family branding, or wellness aesthetics do the thinking for you. If the bottle says cocktail, drink, beverage, or blend, slow down immediately. If the label feels healthier than the ingredient logic sounds, trust the ingredient logic. If the product is built around children, scrutinize it more, not less. If the bottle sells simplicity, ask whether the nutrition and processing reality are actually simple, or whether the design just makes them feel that way. And even with the better brands, remember what juice is. It is not whole fruit. It is not a free pass because the sugar came from fruit. It is not automatically the smarter everyday choice just because the label avoided cartoon colors. The safest mindset is not, which bottle looks healthiest? It is, which product is being the most honest about what it is? That is the deeper truth of this category. The worst players often use sweetness and fruit imagery to create comfort. The more sophisticated players use minimalism and wellness language to create confidence. Different tactics, same goal. Reduce scrutiny at the point of purchase. The moment you stop buying the feeling and start auditing the formulation, the aisle looks completely different. So if one of these brands is sitting in your fridge right now, I want to know which one it is, and whether you bought it for the taste, the label, the kids, or the health halo. And if there is a juice brand you think deserves to be defended, or one you think should have made this list, drop it in the comments. The next time you reach for a bottle that looks safe because it feels familiar, remember this. In the juice aisle, trust is often the most processed ingredient of all.